Well, once again, I'm starting at a weird time on Tuesday because Tuesday's that crazy shopping day. And it's either a little bit early or very, very late. So I'm going to shoot for a little bit early. We're going to talk about Frida Harris this morning. And I found a little biographical sketch of her on a biography website, but they had a picture of Pamela Coleman Smith on there, and I posted that a little prematurely before I took a good look. But anyway, we're going to talk about Frida Harris this morning from the parking lot of Sprouts, Sacramento. And I think this is the only Sprouts in Sacramento. We are very, very near Land Park and the Sacramento Zoo area. It's a very, very lovely area. But it is colder than, I don't know whose kind of tit it is as cold as, but we're not used to it. Anyway, I'm going to read some words about Frida Harris from my understanding, Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. And I know over 2 years ago, probably I've read from here before. But for those of you who may have missed it, and for those of you who have yet to have this wonderful book in your library, here's a teaser. Please get it. I've made no further provisions for my family's future. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3. The Lady and the Beast. Little epigram. The epigrams in this book usually come from excerpts from Crowley's letters to Frida Harris or Frida Harris's letters to Crowley. I've peppered the entire book with their correspondence back and forth because it's just plain interesting. So this is from a letter to Crowley from Harris, January 28th, 1940. Don't, Aleister, say, like me a little. If I may aspire to such a position, you are my friend. And when my friends are rude to me, I cannot remember it. They remain the cone, the eye, the node from which is generated all the pleasure I have in life. Was Frida Harris a lady? Of course she was. But the first little bit of information we should learn about her concerns her use of the title, lady. She is almost always referred to in print as Lady Frida Harris. This is not technically correct, however. British book antiquarian and Crowley Harris scholar Clive Harper wrote me the following. And hello, Clive. I miss you. I want to come back to England and see you and Deb and everybody. But I digress. Here's what Clive wrote me. Percy Harris was made baronet in 1932. A baronetcy can be thought of as an inheritable Sir title. He was appointed to the Privy Council in 1940 and so became entitled to be called the Right Honourable. But strictly speaking, this is an office rather than an honor. The wife of a baronet is indeed a, quote, lady, unquote. But as the wife of Sir Percy Harris, she should have been known as Lady Harris. Lady Frieda Harris would have only been correct if she was, for example, the daughter of a duke, and so entitled to the courtesy title through her father. If she had divorced her husband, she would have been properly called Frieda Lady Harris. But she didn't divorce him. They were estranged for a number of years. Now it is clear that she herself used Lady Frieda Harris, but she would certainly have known the protocol for such things. One can but suspect that she was not averse to letting people assume that she came from a noble family, rather than being merely the estranged wife of a baronet. So that's what Clive wrote me about the use of the title. There is very little information available concerning the personal relationship that existed between Lady Harris and Aleister Crowley. In my mind, it is a story that perhaps could only have been written by E.M. Forster and filmed by Merchant Ivory. I can imagine the movie trailer. Cue the string quartet. Free-thinking London socialite and surrealist painter Frieda Harris, wife of the Right Honourable Sir Percy Alfred Harris, MP, powerful chief whip of the Liberal Parliamentary Party, mysteriously falls under the spell of the notorious black magician Aleister Crowley, the most vilified and despised man in England. Ignoring the possible social consequences, she becomes his magical disciple and agrees to focus her immense talent on a strange and monumental task. She would, under his domination, manifest 78 watercolor paintings of his awesome, sometimes terrifying vision of the magical and spiritual forces of nature projected through the ancient archetypal images of the tarot. Excuse me, on Tuesdays I ham it up. It's veggie-ham for us, though. True to the art film milieu, the climax of this melodrama is played out against the chaotic backdrop of wartime London. The troop trains, the rationing, the sirens, the blitz, the blackouts. It really is too romantic for words. It wasn't exactly like that, however. First, to be fair to the memories of these two brilliant and colorful characters, we must remember that they were both in their 60s. Rumors notwithstanding, Crowley's failing health and Lady Harris's extremely visible social calendar made it highly unlikely their collaboration was one mad and titillating adulterous romp. Second, it was Harris, not Crowley, who suggested that he redesign the traditional tarot images and write a book about it, which she would illustrate with 78 paintings. Crowley flatly refused, suggesting simply they get a hold of the best available old pack and have them redrawn with occasional corrections and emendations, unquote. That's what Crowley wanted her to do. A project like that, he speculated, would take only 6 months to complete. Harris was adamant, however. She insisted upon painting entirely new tarot images that would illustrate a comprehensive new book from Crowley. She wanted Crowley to write a book, and she'd illustrate it. She eventually made Crowley an offer he couldn't refuse. She would pay him a weekly stipend of £2 a week to teach her magic. Crowley was bankrupt. He acquiesced. Crowley was introduced to Crowley by artist friend and London socialite Greta Valentine. They were all mutual friends of Clifford Bax, former co-editor of the literary and art magazine The Golden Hind. Harris was a co-mason and no stranger to esoteric subjects and ritual work. But at the beginning of the project, she was a complete magical novice and by no means a tarot expert. Nonetheless, she said she felt impelled by her holy guardian angel, and the footnote is to the letter where she says something like this, to create images that most accurately conveyed the deepest magical spiritual meaning of each card. She thoroughly acquainted herself with the traditional tarot images and the descriptions found in the Equinox. She worked tirelessly from Crowley's sketches and notes and thought nothing of repainting a single card as many as 8 times to satisfy his demands. Crowley, displaying an uncharacteristic level of gracious candor, readily admitted that Harris's genius forced him to apprehend each card as an individual masterpiece, and that her energy, not his, was the impetus that saw the enormous undertaking through to completion. It was truly a dynamic partnership of two brilliant and intensely motivated artists. But did Crowley, who fancied himself a good intuitive painter, try to influence Harris's style in executing the cards? The answer is yes, especially early in the project, when it was obvious that Frida was bent on a level of expression that might have rendered the Thoth deck unrecognizable as tarot. Crowley, in a December 19, 1939 note, wrote to Harris concerning her work on Adjustment, or the Justice card, which is titled Adjustment, and her fear of painting faces. The letter gives us an idea of the direction the Thoth tarot might have taken had Crowley not put his foot down. He also, with typical Crowley hyperbole, tears into her circle of friends who were currently influencing her artistic attitudes. Now, I got to digress for just a second because I'm going to read this letter to her. We know full well that Crowley was not homophobic. Okay, Crowley was bisexual himself. Okay, we could say he was omnisexual. Okay, he had, but he came from a generation right out of the Oscar Wilde years of underground homosexuality, and the circle of friends that Crowley had circulated in, especially in his younger days, was at least what Crowley considered a deeper, a more philosophically and spiritually profound circle of friends than the 1940s society friends that Frida Harris was palling around with. Okay, that's the best way I can describe it to set up what he's about to say to her in 1939 here. And he's doing it in reference to her artistic desire to be avant-garde and her artistic desire to be really weird with her paintings, okay? And Crowley's thinking, the tarot is archetypal images, okay? They're images for a reason and not completely abstract, okay? Okay. Your feeling about having no forms and faces is merely symptomatic of modern soul sickness. It is a lack of confidence in one's creative powers. Now get this. It is the root of homosexuality as understood in this country. And all these crazy movements, the neo-Thomists and the Bachmanites and the Dadaists and the Surrealists. Picasso took it far enough. He tried to paint a chair which could not be any particular chair and must therefore have to have no color and no form, but as every chair, in order to be a chair, must have support for the human frame, he did a horizontal line. But this is metaphysics and not art. All these half-sexed, half-witted people, sicklied over with pale caste of thought, I cannot believe that any of them will ever command either the Exeter, the Ajax, or the Achilles. And any man who is not potentially capable of doing that is not a man at all. He may be some kind of pudding. And I hold no brief against puddings. But all these people who resent the simplicity resent manhood. They weave their own onanistic web of nastiness. They are the shells cast off from the tree of life. These are the larvae of abomination. It has been your evil fortune to have far too much to do with such people without proper clinical training. Such as would have enabled you to diagnose their malady. They have small orts of cleverness without any breadth of vision or balance, without any sense of space, of nature, of fresh air. I must emphasize that this fear of faces is an appalling symptom of cowardice. It is surely a natural instinct to connect expression with moral ideas, and it is moral ideas, or more correct, magical ideas, that you are out to illustrate. It did not matter so much in this particular card, okay, the Justice card. And you'll notice in Harris's paintings that the faces, for the most part, are pretty blank, not very detailed. It did not matter so much in this particular card because of the tradition of justice being blind. But on the other hand, the masking of the face suggests deceit, which is the absolute opposite of the intention of the card. It was the familiars of the Inquisition. It was the Vengericht that administered what they called justice, hooded. Impartiality is a lovely idea, but it doesn't get you very far if the impartial person may be impersonated by a demon of malignant darkness. Unquote. That's that letter. Wow. Here's what Lon says. Why don't you tell us how you really feel, Mr. Crowley? A critic said, oh, that DuQuette is so flippant. He says things like, oh, tell us how you feel, Mr. Crowley. Well, I'm sorry. I respect anybody who takes the time to comment. Lady Harris exhibited the paintings on at least 3 occasions. First in June of 1941 at the Randolph Hotel in Oxford. Then again in July 1942 at the Berkeley Galleries on Davis Street, London. And in August 1942 at the Royal Society of Painters in Watercolors on Conduit Street, London. At Harris's insistence, Crowley was not in attendance, nor did his name appear anywhere in the program essays. In 1944, Crowley published the first edition of the Book of Thoth, the textbook the cards were to illustrate. Assisting him financially with the project and several others was a young American soldier, Lieutenant Grady L. McMurtry, a member of Crowley's magical order, Ordo Templi Orientis. In 1969, he would also be instrumental in arranging to have the 78 paintings photographed and published as a deck of tarot cards. Now, I've got a couple footnotes here that I think are important for me to share with you. So I think it's 32. Major Grady Lewis McMurtry, 1918 to 1985. McMurtry would also be instrumental in resurrecting Crowley's magical society, Ordo Templi Orientis, from certain extinction. In the 1970s, my wife Constance and I had the great privilege to receive our OTO degree initiations from this remarkable and extremely colorful man. In 1977, through the kind efforts of Mr. Gerald York and Mr. Stephen Skinner, God bless Stephen Skinner, the paintings were again photographed and the new prints used to greatly enhance the quality of subsequent editions of the Thoth Tarot. A handful of atrociously reproduced prototype decks were manufactured in 1944. Neither Crowley nor Harris appears to have profited from that venture. And that's the only manifested deck that they saw. Okay. McMurtry was the only person I've ever talked to who actually met Lady Harris. He first met her at Crowley's flat at 93 Jermyn Street, Piccadilly. Shortly afterward, Crowley moved out of the city to Buckinghamshire. McMurtry and Harris would meet once again at her home in London. It was a brief encounter, but his description of the event, which I heard him recount at least a half a dozen times, is such a charming peek at Harris's character and so indicative of the milieu of the times that I cannot resist in attempting to retell it. I hope Crowley biographers will forgive if my recollection of McMurtry's oft-told story differs with their understanding of objective history. And I believe anybody who knew Grady personally had heard this story pretty much as I'm going to tell it. It was late in 1944, less than 2 weeks before he'd be part of the D-Day Normandy invasion. Lieutenant McMurtry visited Crowley at his home at the Bell Inn in Ashton, Clinton, in Buckinghamshire. Because McMurtry had access to a jeep and petrol, Crowley asked him if he could deliver some papers to Lady Harris in London. Excited at the thought of seeing Harris again, he readily agreed. It was early in the evening, and the city was blacked out by the time he reached a Harris residence at 3 Devonshire Terrace, Marylebone High Street. And you know I'm butchering all of the pronunciations. That's just the way I am. Forgive me. As he approached the door, he heard piano music and the sweet notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune from inside the Harris house. McMurtry told me he remembered thinking what an awkward contrast he made, a lanky American soldier in jump boots standing at the door of this genteel gathering. He knocked, and soon a man dressed in evening wear opened the door. It was obvious there was a party in progress. A pianist was entertaining guests. McMurtry stated his business and was asked to wait outside the door. In a few moments, Lady Harris opened the door and greeted him politely and accepted the paperwork with thanks. Then, as she was about to close the door in his face, she turned her head for a moment and gazed upon the bright warmth of her party, the quiet talk, the Debussy. For a moment, McMurtry was sure she was going to invite him in. Then she turned to look at him in his uniform and boots and said, "You do understand, of course. I can't invite you in. It would so spoil the mood of the evening." Contrast to the absurd published statements that Crowley grew rich from the sales of the Thoth Tarot. Oh God, there's all sorts of stories on the internet about Crowley making millions while she died in poverty. Okay, excuse me. Contrast to the absurd published statements that Crowley grew rich from the sales of the Thoth Tarot while Lady Harris went unrecognized and unpaid. Neither Harris nor Crowley would live to profit financially from the project or even see the paintings properly manifested as tarot cards. Crowley died in 1947. Harris visited him a few days before he died. He did not recognize her. She became co-executor of his will and was among the handful of people who attended his funeral. She also hosted a lavish curry wake in his honor in her home in London. After the death of Sir Percy in 1952, Frida, Lady Harris, moved to Srinagar in Kashmir to live out her years on a houseboat. Her modest income supplemented by the sale of her paintings and writings. Contrary to rumors, the lady did not die impoverished, nor did she regret her relationship with the beast. In a 1958 letter to a friend in England, she described the virtues and vices of a Kashmiri gentleman friend named Shabu. She fondly contrasts his character with her memories of Crowley. Here's what she said. "But there is Shabu who remains. He is incapable of telling the truth, except about God, which I can't prove anyway, but how charming he is. Although sometimes I weary of his naive interpretations and moral narrowness and long for A.C., who was so damn clever and without limitations." Frieda Harris died in 1962. Crowley, who wrote this earlier, Crowley, who was noted for rarely saying anything nice about anyone, paid uncharacteristic tribute to her with adulation in the biographical note from the Book of Thoth. She devoted her genius to the work. With incredible rapidity, she picked up the rhythm and with inexhaustible patience submitted to the correction of the fanatical slave driver that she had invoked, often painting the same card as many as 8 times until it measured up to his vanadium steel yardstick. May the passionate love under will, which she has stored in this treasury of truth and beauty, flow forth from the splendor and strength of her work to enlighten the world. May this tarot serve as a chart for the bold seamen of the new aeon, to guide them across the great sea of understanding to the city of the pyramids. And that's our words about Frieda Harris. And until tomorrow, you guys continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. I hope if you even have the slightest interest in the Thoth Tarot or in tarot in general, that you not only treat yourself to getting the Thoth Tarot deck and working with it and studying it and read the best absolute commentary on the Thoth Tarot in Crowley's own The Book of Thoth, beautiful edition published by Weiser. And if you would like a little more information and perhaps even make the Book of Thoth more readily understandable, you might want to also look into my understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. So, until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.